Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone. Now, me and my friends want to explain about translation method. My name is Azila Putri Yulianti, and I will explain about definition of translation method. A method of foreign or second language teaching which makes use of translation and grammar study as the main teaching and learning activities. Okay, let's move. Semantics translation. Semantics translation is the process of using semantic information to aid in the translation of data in one representation or data model to another representation or data model. Semantics translation differs from faithful translation only in as far as it must take more account of the aesthetic value of the SL text, compromising on meaning where appropriate so that no assonance, wordplay, or repetition jars in the finish. Okay, next, the distinction between faithful and semantic translation. The first is uncompromising and dogmatic, the second is more flexible, and the last admits the creative exception to 100% fidelity and allows for the translator's intuitive empathy with the original. For example, SL, he is a bookworm. TL, dia, laki-laki adalah orang yang suka sekali membaca. Bookworm translated flexibly appropriate with culture context and functional restriction that accepted in target language. But translate above appropriate less and have to translate become dia seorang kutu buku. Idiomatic translation. Idiomatic translation reproduces the message of the original but tends to distort nuances of meaning by preferring colloquialism and idioms where these do not exist in the original. Idiomatic translation refers to being in the common language of average speakers using the natural phrasing and idioms of the language. The process of idiomatic translations starts from very literal to modified literal to near idiomatic to idiomatic and then even move on the beyond free. For example, who has been living with? Dengan siapa dia tinggal? In example above, we can see that there is a change of structure. The word dengan is placed in front of the sentence and it makes the sentence better. The result of the translation is easier to understand and to accept by the readers. Reproducing a good receptor language text which communicates the same message as the source language but using the natural grammatical and lexical choice of the receptor language becomes the main purpose of a translator.
Word-for-word translation. According to Newmark, word-for-word translation is translation method where the source language word order is preserved and the words translated singly by their most common meanings out of context. Cultural words are translated literally. The main use of word-for-word translation is either to understand the mechanics of the source language or construe a difficult text as a pre-translation process. In short, word-for-word translation is translation method of text done by translating word by word sequentially without looking at how the words are used together. This translation method can be perfectly applied if the source language structure is similar with target language structure. Example: first, the source language is there are 3 boys and 2 girls in Team B. The target language is ada 3 anak laki-laki dan 2 anak perempuan di tim B. From this example, we can conclude that This word-for-word translation is acceptable and it can be perfectly applied because the structural language of source language and the target language are similar. And then the second example is I know that literature is for the source language, and then the target language is aku tahu itu anak perempuan. In this example, the structural language of source language and target language are different, so it should be avoided to use word-for-word translation. Literal translation. According to Newmark, literal translation is the source language grammatical construction are converted to their nearest target language equivalents, but the lexical words are again translated singly out of context. As a pre-translation process, this indicates the problems to be solved. Similar with word-for-word translation, literal translation or penerjemahan harfiah is translation method of text where the target language copies the source language, but we also need to adjust the source language structure with the target language structure. Example, the source language is my house is in the right side, and the target language is rumahku berada di sisi kanan. Meanwhile, if we use word-for-word translation, it will be rumahku berada di dalam kanan sisi. So, the difference of word-for-word translation and literal translation is, in literal translation, we need to adjust the source language and the target language structure language. Meanwhile, word-for-word, there is no obligation. Free translation. According to Newmark, free translation is translation method that reproduces the matter without the manner or the context without the form of the original. Usually, it is a paraphrase much longer than the original, a so-called interlingual translation, often prolix and pretentious, and not translation at all. Example, the source language, it's heavy rain. You have better stay here for a while or you will be soaking wet. The target language is di luar hujan deras. Lebih baik kamu tinggal dulu beberapa saat atau kamu akan basah kuyup. Heavy rain and soaking wet in the source language here are freely translated into hujan deras dan basah kuyup.
Faithful translation. A faithful translation attempts to reproduce the precise contextual meaning of the original within the constraints of the target language grammatical structures. It attempts to be completely faithful to the intentions and the text realization of the source language writer. For the example, Raden Ajeng Kartini is a Javanese. It is the source language, and the target language is Raden Ajeng Kartini adalah orang Jawa. The second example, Ben is too well aware that he is naughty. For the target language is Ben menyadari terlalu baik bahwa ia nakal. Those examples transfer cultural words and preserve the degree of grammatical and lexical abnormality. or the deviation from source language norms in the translation. Next is adaptation. Adaptation is the freest form of translation. It is used mainly for plays, such as comedies and poetry, especially for the themes, characters, plots are usually preserved. The source language culture converted to the target language culture and the text rewritten. For the example, the rising sun is found not to be rising sun. It is the world which goes around. And the target language is matahari terbit ternyata bukan matahari terbit. Dunialah yang sebenarnya mengorbit. And the last one is communicative translation. Communicative translation attempts to render the exact contextual meaning of the original in such a way that both content and language are readily acceptable and comprehensible to the readership. For the example, keep off the grass, and the target language is dilarang menginjak rumput. The second example, I would admit that I am wrong. The target language is saya mau mengakui bahwa saya salah. Furthermore, communicative translation is a subject translation because it tries to reach the target effect of certain action on the target language of the reader. That's all our presentation. If you have any questions, let's discuss together. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.